Hey, what's going on YouTube? It's Pyromancer here, and today, finally, we're going to be taking a look at the Affliction Warlock for patch 7.3. This is going to be my quick starter guide, and I'm going to try really hard to make this a lot quicker than the Destruction one. So Affliction Warlock is the truest dot spec in the game. As Affliction, we have three main dots, which are Agony, Corruption, and Unstable Affliction. Agony is our primary dot and stacks up to 10 times without any talents. Corruption is a secondary dot which does damage, and with the tier set will actually help you get soul shards back. Agony is our main soul shard generator, so having Agony on as many targets as possible that are going to live long enough for the damage to mean anything is going to really exponentially increase how you gain shards in this spec. Now, shards and mana are our two primary resources. I track my mana via a weak aura here with percent in the middle, and then I track my shards with my shard weak aura. So how does it work? Basically, and it's really, really simple, you keep up these two dots, Agony and Corruption. You just always keep them up, and then you use Unstable Affliction to spend your shards in single target. Now, you can also in AoE use Seed of Corruption, which is an AoE ability that will move towards the targeted foe, and it will spread this Seed of Corruption, and once the target with Seed of Corruption on it has taken enough damage, it will burst and put Corruption on everything around it. So that, combined with our set bonus from this tier, Corruption has a chance to generate a soul shard whenever it deals damage, is pretty solid because you have a lot more targets corrupted. Now, one thing I want to mention, because they didn't say anything about it, they updated the Infernal. It's actually got this burning kind of animation to it now. So that's really cool. Now, is that all that there is to Affliction? No. There's a lot of things that are determined by talents, a lot of things that can be determined by gear, and I want to talk about that really quickly. So basically, you have these two dots, yeah. You shard dump with Unstable Affliction, keep up Agony and Corruption, and then you have a filler called Drain Soul. Now, Drain Soul will heal you for a ridiculous amount, but it will also just do damage to the target as you're channeling on it. This is what you want to fill with once you have some UAs on the target, because what will happen is if you're just standing here, obviously doing nothing, all you can do is keep refreshing your dots. So you need to be filling with Drain Soul. It heals you a lot, so there's a massive benefit to it. And then in AoE, if there's 4 or more targets, Seed of Corruption is really, really good. But if you are trying to focus on one target, then you still would want to use Unstable Affliction, which is a dot that can go on the target. You can have up to 5 Unstable Afflictions on a target. So if you get a lot of really good procs and you dump more than 5 into the target, sometimes you're kind of wasting ticks because it's overriding some of the UAs that are already on the target, if that makes sense. So what pet do you use as the spec? Just like Destruction, you have access to all 4 of the basic pets, but unfortunately, that's not something that we ever really do because of the talents that we use for our specialization. Now, we're going to talk talents real quick for PvE setting, and there's really only a couple that you change, I guess. Well, I guess you really do change quite a few of them. So I'm going to just talk about ones that we don't really use. Haunt, I'm not going to talk about because we don't use. ELT, we don't use. Grimoire of Sacrifice and Grimoire of Service we don't use. They function exactly the same way as they do for Destruction, where you have a primary imp or Fell Hunter in this case, and then you could use Service to summon a second one, or you could use Sacrifice to sacrifice that pet and gain the AoE pulsing ability. Just really not that good. Supremacy is way better for us. The reason for that is our pets, one, they scale from our mastery, so there's that. But it provides us with an interrupt. It's very static. A lot of our shards are going to be focused on being spent on Unstable Affliction, and so we want to try and spend the least amount of shards as possible on other things. And we do have the option to have a really solid AoE pet through the Infernal, which also provides us with an AoE stun. So and it can tank for you. So that's really, really good. That's kind of what we're always going to use. Supremacy is always used for Affliction. You never use the other two. But anyway, the main 2 talents that we use in the first row are Writhe and Agony. The first, Writhe and Agony and Malefic Grasp. Writhe and Agony makes it so Agony damage can ramp up to 15 stacks. So instead of capping at 10, it's just going to cap at 15. It's going to give you a lot more damage at that point. Just exponentially scales the more targets you have. This is your multi-target and high movement talent. This is generally what you will find yourself taking in a lot of Mythic Plus, especially if it's fortified. You can take MG in Mythic Plus technically, but I think multi-dotting with Writhe can be better. The other option is, like you probably assumed, Malefic Grasp. This is a passive ability that makes it so while we're channeling Drain Soul at the target, the damage of our dots does 25% more damage. So when I have this and I'm having these dots on the target, these dots while I'm channeling are going to do 25% more damage. So basically, running MG, you have to be standing still in order to cast Drain, obviously. So the handicap of this is that it's not really good in a lot of movement fights, but it will exponentially increase your single target. All the top parsers on Sisters of the Moon, Goroth, and other fights are running this because it's just simply the best single target talent that you can take. Now, we don't change those too often. You take Malefic Grasp on like 3 fights in TOS. But these other ones we do change around a bit. Now, Contagion is our go-to for this tier. It's a passive that makes it so you deal 15% increased damage to targets affected by your Unstable Affliction. Now, Unstable Affliction, again, is our Shard Dump dot. The thing is that if you're using Malefic Grasp, generally how you would want to go is you'd want to put in 2 Unstable Afflictions and then drain, right? And then you just drain the Unstable Afflictions off, okay? And then once they're gone, you put 2 more on. But if you were to run Writhe and Agony, for example, your drain up time doesn't matter as much. So your freedom with Unstable Affliction becomes a lot more free, really. So what I mean by that is on Fallen Avatar, what I do, for example, and I didn't get a great parse. We had a kind of not a great kill time. But basically what I do is I will make sure that I'm not capping on my shards, and I'll just chain them together while I have Soul Harvest up, which we'll talk about. So that way, even my Agony and Corruption are always benefiting from that 18% or 15% damage buff. And then once my duration on my Soul Harvest or my Reap gets to be below the duration of Unstable Affliction, which is a baseline 5 seconds, once it's to that point, then I'll just dump the rest of my UAs kind of preemptively. That can happen. So I'll show you guys exactly what I mean by that, but let's keep talking about the talents. Then we have Absolute Corruption. This is one that you'll take in a lot of different situations, primarily high uptime multi-dotting situations. So if you have 2 targets like Demonic Inquisition, this talent is super good because it makes your Corruption do 25% more damage, and it lasts permanently as well. So that being combined with Seed of Corruption will spread a permanent corruption that'll do 25% more damage. It's great because on fights where you're going into other phases like Demonic Inquisition, you can continue to have uptime on corruption on those 2 targets even while you're in the lower phase. So this is really good for more AoE situations where we wouldn't see Contagions use as much. And then ELT, we never take that. Just not worth it compared to the other 2 things that we have. Now the next row, Demonic Circle, again for raiding and PvE, I generally think is the best because the only other 2 options you get as Affliction are fears. One is Mortal Coil, one is Howl of Terror. There's actually a lot of things that are immune to fear, so I don't really recommend those. So I always take Demonic Circle. You can take these for PvP and crowd control, obviously, but I don't really recommend it unless you are doing something that you know fearing the mobs is not going to fuck you over. After that, we have Phantom Singularity, Sow the Seeds, and Soul Harvest. So Phantom Singularity versus Soul Harvest is pretty debatable at this point. I really think that Soul Harvest has the highest ceiling that you can obtain with damage. I really do think that overall, in realistic fight situations, Soul Harvest is the best. It's a 2-minute cooldown, gives you and your pet 20% increased damage for 12 seconds baseline. If you have Agony spread to multiple targets, it will last 4 seconds longer per Agony that you have spread out there, up to a maximum of 36 seconds. So having multiple targets dotted, especially because Agony, unlike Immolate for destruction, is such a big portion of our damage, you really do want to have as many Agonies out as you can. I would say minimum 3 or 4 if you have that many targets available before popping Soul Harvest. This is going to be really, really good on fights like Mistress, pretty much on every fight, to be honest with you. The AoE option, Burst AoE specifically, is going to be Sow the Seeds. This is going to allow us, like I said, to spread Corruption, and mixed with Writhe and Agony and Absolute Corruption, this can result in quite a powerful AoE spec. I really do think it's better for Burst AoE, whereas Phantom Singularity is a nice mix between Sow the Seeds and Soul Harvest, where it does pretty good single target. It's actually pretty close to Soul Harvest, but also does AoE ability, AoE damage on a 40-second cooldown. to anything within 15 yards of your target. So if I were to put this on this mob right here, anything within 15 yards is going to take shadow damage as well as the main target. And this is affected, I'm pretty sure, by contagion. If you were spec'd into it, I'm pretty sure that you get the bonus damage from that. But overall, I think Soul Harvest is the best for raiding. Sow the Seeds, Burst AoE, Phantom Singularity, more sustained and split with single target damage. So after that, we have Demon Skin, Burning Rush, Dark Pact. Your survivability as Affliction is already so fucking good. I really don't think Demon Skin or Dark Pact are necessary 100% for anything. I just take Burning Rush because we don't really have, I just accidentally drank a potion. We don't really have many good alternatives to our speed. You know what I mean? There's not really much else Affliction can do. Of course it gets Demonic Circle and it gets Gateway like the other two specs, but we can cast while we move, so we're not really that movement hindered. We can cast our dots, 2 of them anyway, but you can still get... Obviously, it's obviously beneficial to have Burning Rush. Now, like I said, Supremacy for literally everything. If you're doing single target or even 2 target, I would say you are going to want to run your Doom Guard. Whereas if you're doing AoE, probably 4 or more targets, Infernal is going to be much better. Now, obviously, if you have a priority target, Infernal does not do priority target damage, so I don't recommend it for that. But it does do a lot of AoE damage, and it does a pretty decent AoE stun as well on a minute cooldown. After that, again, like I mentioned in the Destro video, you might notice that I have 2 talents here. That is because we have a legendary called Soul of the Netherlord that for Affliction gives you Death's Embrace. So let me take this off real quick and we're going to talk about these talents. So on the last row, we have Death's Embrace, Siphon Life, and Soul Conduit. Without slamming Siphon Life too hard, you never use it. It doesn't do enough damage. The healing from it is rather insignificant in my opinion. It heals you for 60% of the damage, which is nice, but when you think about the fact that it's only 800k damage over 15 seconds, that's really not that much healing. Granted, you can multi-dot with it, and it does give you another dot that can be cast on the move, which is nice. But aside from that, it's really just not that good. You don't really ever take Siphon Life. The other 2 options are much better. We have Soul Conduit, which means every shard that we spend has a 20% chance to be refunded for Affliction. So Soul Conduit is actually better for Affliction than Destruction. This is a really, really good AoE ability because if we're going to be spamming Seed, Death's Embrace only affects the Execute. We'll talk about that in a second. And Siphon Life just does not compete with Soul Conduit and AoE at all. Soul Conduit is just way better. Now, the last option is Death's Embrace, which is a passive, which means Agony, Corruption, all your damage, everything that you cast basically does up to 50% increased damage on targets below 35% health. So the lower the HP of the target gets, the more damage Death's Embrace will do. So basically, what this allows you to do is have a passive scaling execute. So what a lot of people do for AoE and single target, a lot of, like, if you have a fight like Goroth where the execute's not that long, I wouldn't recommend Death's Embrace because the boss is just going to go down quickly. You're not going to get longevity in your execute, and Death's Embrace isn't really good for that. It's not like Warrior Execute where you just all of a sudden start doing massive damage. This does require a scaling. The lower the boss gets, the more damage you do, and generally speaking, the faster the boss dies towards the exponentially higher damage increase at the end of Death's Embrace. So what a lot of people do single target is they actually will take Soul Conduit, but because Soul of the Netherlord is so damn good for Affliction, which we'll talk about in just a second, because it's so damn good, you can actually take both, and you just leave Siphon Life out of the equation so that you get that RNG in your favor for AoE and general shard spending, and you get your Execute as well. This is one of the best legendaries for Affliction right now. Now, one thing I don't want to forget is something about the artifact weapon, which is really important. Basically, the main thing that our artifact weapon does is called Reap Souls. So as we go throughout a fight, we will generate stacks of tormented souls. Now, you can generate up to 12 of them, and each of them will give you 5 seconds of soul harvest per stack consumed. So I have 2 right now. If I pop it, I'll get 10 seconds. And what this does is it increases your damage by 10% baseline and doubles the effectiveness of every single trait on your artifact weapon. So when you go into your artifact weapon, you're going to notice things like Inherently Unstable and Perdition. Perdition, for example, increases the crit damage of Agony, Corruption, Drain Soul, and Unstable Affliction by 20%. So if you are getting those to crit, you get some stacks of Reap Souls, right? and that will go to 40% because it's doubling the effectiveness of that trait. So Reap Souls is huge in our rotation, and when it comes to the rotation of Affliction, it is very, very simple. Like I said, you keep up both your dots, you spend your shards on Unstable Affliction and single target, and you spend it on Seed of Corruption and AoE. But if you run Malefic Grasp, which a lot of the times people will, because it is the best for single target, you have a slightly different rotation. So because you kind of want to space your drains out, basically this is how you would do it. You'd keep your 2 main dots up, you'd put 2 UAs up, reap, and then drain. Basically the point of this is to allow for the maximum uptime of Reap Souls on your powered drains while channeling MG. So the reason you don't do like 3 or 4 is your UA starts ticking as soon as you apply it. So you're going to be missing ticks if you start to go into 3 or 4, which you can do if you have Lust or if you have a Whispers proc. You can dump more UAs if you want to and keep channeling. But the number one thing that you need to make sure you're doing when you're running Malefic Grasp is channeling every single time that you have Unstable Affliction on the target, because that's our main damage, as you'll see here, and it's really important that we're getting a 25% damage boost on that while it's on the target. So that's the only thing really that rotationally changes for Affliction. That's really the only talent that alters it in any way, whereas Contagion, you just want to make sure you have a high uptime on the target, especially if you're running Writhe and Agony with your 15 stack Agony. One of the most important things, especially running Writhe and Agony, is to never let Agony fall off. It does so much damage, and it takes a long time to scale back up to 15 stacks. So if you can at all ever avoid that, do it. Now that we've got through the talents and through the general rotation for Affliction, I want to talk about the legendaries, because they are very, very important. Now I want to start this by saying that I don't have every legendary for Affliction, and I don't really have super good trinkets for Affliction either. But Affliction, thankfully, is one of those specs that it scales well enough that you can pretty much run so many different setups and still do good damage as Affliction. It's just a very, very consistent and powerful spec. One thing I want to talk about for Affliction that I did not talk about for Destruction is the tier 19 set bonus before I get into legendaries. The tier 19 set bonus 2-piece makes it so Unstable Affliction deals 10% additional damage over time. Any situation where you're running Contagion, especially if you're running Malefic Grasp, you want to run the old 2-piece and the new 4-piece if you can. Now, keep in mind this does restrict you from using the Master Harvester, Hood of Eternal Disdain, and a couple other legendaries for Affliction. I think those are the 2 main ones that you can't use because you have to wear all 6 pieces of tier, but it is worth it. 10% UA damage is huge. That's a really big boost, and it generally is worth sacrificing those other legendaries in order to do that. But if you don't have that, you're perfectly fine running tier 24 piece. That's totally okay. This really is only good in single target when you're doing UA a lot of the time, when you're not spending it on seed, when you're not spending a lot of your time multi-dotting and things like that. That's when this 2-piece is good, but outside of that, it's not really that great. Now, legendaries for AF, what are the best? Well, thankfully, we actually have quite a good combination of good legendaries. So, one of the best ones, and one of the most widely used ones, like I said, is Soul of the Netherlord, because we get Soul Conduit and we get the Execute talent, Death's Embrace. This just straight up is a super powerful ring. It also has a lot of stats on it, so there's that as well, and it has a socket. After that, I would say Hood of Eternal Disdain, which I unfortunately don't have. It makes it so your Agony does damage 10% faster. Just a really solid, especially when you're going to be doing multi-dotting with Writhe and Agony, you're going to find a lot more value in the Hood at that point. Hood has always been good. I don't think it'll ever not be good. After that, Sacrilash's Dark Strike, a massive ring stat stick with a ton of mastery on it, which makes Corruption deal 15% more damage and slows the enemy by 60% permanently. This is super nice, especially if you combine it with Absolute Corruption in this ring. On something like Demonic Inquisition, you're going to do a shitload of damage. And in world questing content, world PvP, this ring will permanently slow the target if you have Absolute Corruption on it. They can't get rid of it. It will just always be there. So really, really solid multi-target trinket there, or legendary there. Another one, the Master Harvester, one of the best for Affliction, but heavily reliant on RNG. This is that legendary that can literally give you an insane parse, or it can fuck you and you'll get a not very good parse because you ran it and you didn't get lucky. This makes it so each soul shard you spend has a 9% chance to grant you Soul Harvest for 8 seconds. Again, Soul Harvest is that 20% damage increase. Master Harvester is really good for Affliction. because we do spend a lot of shards, and because it has a slightly higher percent chance for Affliction to proc than Destruction. After that, other good Affliction legendaries, the legendary Belt is really good. Power card of Lethendris. Casting Unstable Affliction on a target who is not already affected by UA has a 25% chance to refund the soul shard cost. Especially when you're multi-UAing, spreading that out, this is going to be a pretty good legendary. A lot of times you are going to, especially like what you would do with this, for example, is you'd run Malefic Grasp Contagion, and then you'd run this. So since you're doing your drain cycles, and I'll just put this on, I can't put it on. Since you're doing your drain cycles, let me see, let me just get a different necklace. A lot of times what you'll find is this. So the target doesn't have UA on it. I'll put it on it right here, and I actually got the shard back. So basically I'm just going to drain all of these UAs out, and now I can benefit from the belt again. Since it didn't have it on it, there's a chance there, 25% chance, that I got the shard back. So basically for every UA that you're casting on a target that doesn't already have a UA on it, you have a 25% chance to just get that back. So because of how drain cycles work, this is a really strong legendary, as you generally do let your UAs fall off at the end of your drain cycle, and then you start it over again. So Power Chord is really, really good. Now the other ones that I just don't have for Affliction are Stretton Sleepless Shackles. Really not that good. This tier, I wouldn't recommend it for really anything. Safus can be used on interrupt fights like Mistress. I've seen a couple of really good parses. That gives you baseline haste and a haste proc when you interrupt, fear, stun, or anything like that. However, none of the others are really noteworthy. Reap and Sow is just not that good for us right now. Norganons, those type of things. If you have them and that's all you have, then wear them. But if you don't, then it's not the end of the world. Pride As is also a really good option, and it's generally what I wear because I don't have Hood. The reason that I wear it simply is because it provides a huge stat. It's a huge stat stick. It's actually pretty good for overall damage, but it also does give you a lot of survivability through the absorb. Now, is there anything else that I want to cover for Affliction? I mean, it's the same thing as Destro. You use Potion of Prolonged Power, Flask of the Whispered Pact, and Nightborn Delicacy Platter for Mastery food. Mastery is our best stat for Affliction. That's why you will see me having so much of it. Then if you run Contagion, especially in single target situations, you'll see Haste be much better. And then Critical Strike. I personally weigh Critical Strike last because overall, I just find it to be one of the least valuable stats when compared to Haste or Mastery. I mean, if you run AC and you're getting a shitload of crits with Writhe and Agony and Absolute Corruption, crit can be really, really good. But if you're playing Contagion especially, it is favored by the Haste. So basically it goes Mastery, Haste, Crit. Haste and Crit can be equal, but generally Mastery, Haste, Crit, then Versatility, while having a decent amount of Intellect as well. Trinkets for this spec, I mean, I run Owl and Whispers because it's all I have, but hands fucking down, the best trinkets for this are Whispers in the Dark from Gul'dan and Unstable Arcano Crystal from the World Boss Wither Gem. It's so damn good for Affliction. If you go and look at the top parses, almost everyone is running it. You can run other trinkets like Tome of Unraveling Sanity if you wanted to, but I don't really recommend it. You could also run things like Metronome, Erratic Metronome from Chronomatic Anomaly in Nighthold. Past that, you guys, I mean, there's really not that much to Affliction. It's a pretty straightforward spec. I mean, like I say in the Destro video, get in there and try it out and just get a feel for it so that you can see that you understand it. In multi-target, just throw UAs, or multi-target, I'm sorry. Spread around, like I said, spread around Agony, spread around Corruption. Make sure you're using Seed of Corruption to spread that Corruption. And make sure you're not letting yourself cap on shards. Other than that, Affliction is pretty straightforward. There's not too much else to say about it. Last thing I want to talk about is the artifact weapon and talk about some of our best traits. Our best trait, hands down, is something we call Perdition. That is the one that gives you crit damage on Agony, Corruption, Drain Soul, and UA. This is our best trait by far, and so if you're going for weapon, relics, this is the trait that you want to try and get. Some other really solid traits. I mean, Winnowing is not bad. Other than that, I mean, Inherently Unstable is really good. Inimitable Agony is good. These are all just damage increases to certain spells for us. So Corruption damage through Hideous Corruption, UA crit chance, Agony damage. So just flatline damage increases for us. Just fill out your weapon. Like I said, with how AP is right now, there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to unlock all the traits for your weapon relatively quickly. But I think that's pretty much it, you guys. This one is shorter than the Destro one by a few minutes, so I tried to keep it quick and concise for you. If you have any questions, please feel free to put those down in the comment section below. Drop a like on the video if you did like the video, and make sure you subscribe to my content. 80% of my viewers are not subscribed to my content, which just blows my mind. So if you found something useful in this video, share it with someone and make sure you subscribe before you take off today. I want to thank you once again for making it all the way to the end of this 25-minute video. And if you did, tell me which boss you're most excited to fight in Antorus the Burning Throne on Argus. I'd love to know what you guys are thinking, and pretty soon here we're going to be talking about what I think might be the secret boss of Antorus the Burning Throne. So thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, peace!